Hey guys, my name is Cassidy and you're watching That Spooky Lifestyle, where we bring the ooky, the spooky, the creepy and the crawly into our everyday lives. Today we are going to be talking about the Black Plague, everything that went on with it, what it looked like, you know, the devastation that really happened with it, because it is a huge part of our history. And yeah, I just thought we would kind of learn about it today, talk about it. And if you're kind of squirmish, maybe skip this video. It does have some gruesome tones to it. We are talking about a disease, a plague, so I mean, it's gross and devastating, and yeah, I'm warning you now, so if this video isn't for you, that's totally okay. But I am going to talk about it while I get ready, just so I have kind of something to do as I talk. And yeah, let's jump right into it, guys. Okay, pardon my hair, I haven't done anything with it yet. Literally just woke up, still having coffee, so there's that. I'm gonna put this on. It's like a sleeping for your eyes, but I love using it as a headband. I don't know why. Okay, so if you've watched any of my previous videos like this, you know that I like to start off by talking about what I already know about the subject. So with the Black Plague, what I know about it is it was a devastating disease that killed, I always thought it was like half the population just in general. Like, I knew it was a lot of people, like an insane amount of people. And I know that it had something to do with rats. It's honestly, I would have known more about it in high school, but now it's just been so many years since I've actually looked back into it or researched it, so it's just been a hot minute. And I do know that it kind of happened in like Europe, like that sort of area, and it happened a long time ago. Yeah, that's essentially all I previously knew about it before I started researching. So the Black Death was one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. It killed 75 to 200 million people, and you have to remember this is in the 1300s, so record keeping was not the same as it is today. That's why there's such a large range of how many people actually died during this plague. The Black Plague also took place in Eurasia in the 1300s, like I said, and there are some theories that suggest outside factors played a role in why the Black Plague was so devastating, like war and famine, just political things that were going on at the time that could have aided the disease and basically just being more drastic and deadly than normal, quote unquote. This plague was caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. Let me just check if I got, yeah, Yersinia pestis. And this is a bacteria that is commonly found in fleas that travel on the back of rodents and marmots, just kind of rats, rodents, you know, tiny little gerbils. Most of us will know Yersinia pestis by the bubonic plague, and just to be clear, the bubonic plague is the actual disease and the Black Plague is just a specific instance of when that disease occurred, which was in the 1300s. Like, it's that specific range of time because that portion of the disease, like when that happened, was so devastating that it got its own name. Something to keep in mind is that there are theories that disagree with this and say that the outbreak that happened in the 1300s is not the bubonic plague. It's inconsistent with it. So there are other theories floating around there as well to suggest what could have caused such a crazy outbreak. Some theories suggest that it could have been a form of anthrax mixed with other diseases that could have occurred at the time. Anthrax basically causes you to form small blisters, and there's a bunch of swelling around the blisters, and it can be accompanied by a black kind of hole or center on these blisters. So it is thought that that could have been one of the alternative theories instead of being the bubonic plague. And these symptoms can show up 2 days to 2 months after the person has been infected, so it could technically cause as much devastation or be as fast, what's the word, as fast infecting as the bubonic plague. Some people also suggest that it could be hemorrhagic. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that. It's basically very similar to Ebola. Symptoms start 2 to 3 weeks after the person has been infected, and again, it causes like fevers and vomiting and blisters. This disease also has a very high kill rate of about 25 to 90%, so averaging about 50%. Half the people who get it are going to die, half the people who get it are going to survive. However, the most accepted theory is that it was the bubonic plague. However, you can see there's so many varied symptoms. Like some people had vomiting, some people had fevers, some people had like swells and sores, and so all of these diseases kind of share those symptoms. So it may have been the bubonic plague, it may have been a mix of a bunch of different diseases. Like, it's kind of hard to say because, again, record keeping at the time was not the same as it is today. So along with the different number of symptoms, the issue also that people were facing is that the living conditions weren't real great, and it was like a time of war and famine, so there was there was a bunch of outside factors that could have also been contributing to either the bubonic plague or, you know, Ebola or anthrax or whichever version it was, which may have caused even more varied in symptoms, like various symptoms, if that makes sense. Especially back in those days, hygiene wasn't a real importance then. That was mostly saved for wealthy people. There wasn't proper disposal of sewage, and in some cases, like, there'd be up to 12 people living in sleeping on one floor. So again, it's just kind of like a breeding ground for a disease to hit. And unfortunately, all of the diseases that I mentioned, like the anthrax, the Ebola, and the bubonic plague, they all sort of, They all fester, they all grow in bad conditions like that, like poor hygiene, decaying organic matter. Like, they all are created in those sort of environments. So it was really like a breeding ground for disease at this time in Eurasia. So many believe that this disease originated in Central Asia, and due to climate change, the grasslands there became very, very dry. So the rodents had to go looking for new water, new food supplies. Like, it just, where they were living was such a drastic change that they had to move. So unfortunately, what ended up happening, or at least this is one of the theories, is that the rodents took this disease with the fleas on their backs and stuff, and they traveled through popular merchant areas. So one suggested theory is that the rats went through the Silk Road, which is a merchant trade route that a lot of people used during that time. Or another popular theory is that they traveled by ship, like on merchant ships, and so that kind of spread it from Asia into different parts of Europe. So the Black Death is estimated to have killed 30 to 60% of Europe's total population, and it actually took the world over 200 years to recover from that, because that's just such a huge, devastating loss of life, right? You don't just fix that in a day. It took quite a time, and it was a very, very like devastating disease. Like, it was very fast, it killed people fast, people got infected fast. It was just so, it would have been like unimaginable, really. One of the first reported incidents in Europe was at the Genoese trading post in Kaffa. There was a Mongol army that was already infected with the disease, and what they were doing was catapulting infected dead bodies over like the Kaffa walls into the city to infect the inhabitants, which is just like, it's crazy to think about now that was even a thing. Like, what? So then obviously the Genoese traders like fled the city because they were like, whoa, don't want to get this, whatever the hell's happening here. And unfortunately they carried some of the plague with them and then also helped spread it. So as you can see, like, it started, again, this is a theory, that it started with rodents, started to infect people, and then people started to infect people, and it was just like this, you know, exponential growth of how many people were getting infected with this disease. So once you were infected with the bubonic plague, like I kind of touched on previously, there were physical symptoms you could see. It wasn't just like, oh, I don't feel too good. Like, there were visible sores. A very common thing that happened was it was swelling of your lymph nodes, and it would happen on your inner thigh and your groin area, under your armpits, on your neck, like, and they'd be really big. They'd range in size from about the size of like an egg to the size of an apple. So that's like, to have a sore like that on you is just insane. Like, you can't even Can't even imagine what that would be like. You weren't supposed to touch them or cut them open because they would like ooze pus and blood, and it was just a really painful experience. Keep in mind, the symptoms did vary quite a bit through each person, so that's why again there's so many theories on how many different diseases it could be or which disease it could be. And this was also accompanied though by like fevers and vomiting and sores, so there were a lot of different symptoms that you could have from this, unfortunately, which again nowadays has made it hard to pin down what exactly it was. In some cases even your fingers turned black because your skin was actually dying from I think it was called acral gangrene, which again was caused by the Black Plague. Once you were infected, most victims died between 2 and 7 days of being infected, so you can just imagine like how fast this thing is spreading, and then on top of it how fast people are dying the minute they get it. Like, that's insane. 2 days, 2 to 7 days. It's not even like 2 to 4 months, like 2 to 7 days. Like, that's insane. The most widely accepted estimate of how many people died in the Middle East during this time was about 1/3 of their population. So I've got some numbers here. The Black Death killed around 40% of Egypt's population, half of Paris's population. Florence was reduced from 120,000 people to 50,000 people in just 13 years. And yeah, it just goes on and on and on and on. So for how long the Black Plague lasted, it depends when, like what area you're in. Asia had it before Europe and so on. I think it was about like the 1330s to the 1350s, depending on which area you were in, but still, like, that is not a lot of time for that many people to pass away. Like, it's just insane. So while contemporary reports do state that there was a bunch of mass burials, obviously because there's just so many people passing away right one after another, like they just couldn't do individual ones. But from more recent reports, there have been individual burials found. So I don't know if that's like some people did individual, maybe if you had more money you did individual, maybe if you were poorer you just did a mass burial. I'm not really sure. It didn't really go into too much detail there. So with all of this sickness and people dying, it did create a pretty big need for plague doctors. And I'm sure you've seen images of these guys. They're wearing the beak masks, which we'll talk a bit more about later. Essentially, plague doctors were hired by towns or cities to come and take care of their citizens, essentially, once the Black Plague hit. So they were taken care of quite well because their salary came from the town or the city. And it is said that they would treat everyone, like rich, poor, didn't matter, because again, it wasn't something each citizen paid for, the entire town paid for it. And I think that kind of shows how severe this was, because back in those days, that was not really a thing, you know. However, just like any profession, there are some bad eggs out there, and some doctors would charge families more money or like additional fees for supposed cures and things like that. I did read though that this seems like these were more second grade doctors who didn't actually have any professional training. They were just more there to actually take count of how many people were getting infected. But again, then they tried to do a side hustle and tell people that, you know, they could create the cure, they had the cure, all of this stuff. And yeah, most of the people they treated didn't end up getting cured at all, because obviously these plague doctors, they did wear those beak masks that you've seen, and from what I've researched, it looks like they only wore them in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. So this kind of beak attire, like the beak mask and the black cloak attire, was made by a French physician named Charles de Lomé. This outfit consisted of a light wax-coated overcoat and a long mask with glass eyes, and then in the beak part of it, they'd put aromatic items to help protect them from the Black Plague. So I do have one of those masks. It's not accurate because this is just from a Halloween store. But essentially they should have glass eyes here, and then this would be a lot bigger and shorter just because the aromatic items would go in here. They'd put things in there like cloves, myrrh, berry scents, things like that, just things that smelled good, because during the time that they wore these, a popular theory was that the air was bad, and that's why this disease was happening, is because you were breathing in this bad air. and this was called the miasmatic theory, which is now obsolete. Like, it's not medically correct. No one actually believes it anymore, but during that time they did think that it was because the air was bad. They also called this like night air, and it's basically from all the rotting organic matter that's around them. Again, like I said, the bad living conditions, the bad sewage, people just said it was like the bad air. So these plague doctors were also given special privileges. They were allowed to do autopsies after people had died, which is something that during the medieval time of Europe was like forbidden. It was not allowed at all. So this is kind of when that started happening. And there's actually a story that these doctors were so valuable during the time that Barcelona hired 2 of them to go to one of their cities and obviously help with the Black Plague. And on the way there, these 2 doctors actually got kidnapped by bandits, and Barcelona actually paid the ransom fee because they wanted those doctors so badly. Like, that's kind of the demand that they were needed. But this Barcelona story happened a bit later. It happened in the 1650s, but I think that goes to show, so after the 1300s of that huge wave, bubonic plague and the huge death, and the huge death toll, I think that just goes to show how scared everyone was, and they were just like, yeah, no, we need those doctors, like, whatever your price, we'll make it happen. Unfortunately, during this time period, because of how devastating it was, people lost, like, it was such a loss on a great scale. There's so much grief going around. People wanted answers, like, why is this happening? What is it? What can we do to stop it? And because there were no answers at the time, they just weren't scientifically advanced enough to understand like what was really happening. They started pointing fingers, so this led to people pointing fingers at certain cultures and people to be like, this is your fault. This caused people to persecute Jews, friars, pilgrims, foreigners, anyone who was quote-unquote an easy target. Like, if you weren't like here before, basically they were like, you brought this with you and it's your fault. They also persecuted people with acne and lepers just because on the outside they had a different appearance, which made people scared. Like, do you have the Black Plague? Are you a carrier? Like, what's going on here? Unfortunately, it led to persecuting people who had nothing to do with what was happening. And I think when you experience like grief and like being that scared on that level, like, people just go crazy because they don't know what to do. So the dramatic decline in obviously the human population also led to a dramatic economic shift because there weren't enough people to do all the work that needed to get done. So wages increased dramatically, like insanely. And also landowners had to, instead of getting their tenants to like offer labor to live there, they actually had to switch to paying them a monetary value, because they were like, well, I could stay here and work for you, or I can just go down the street and make 9 times the money. So, sorry, my camera died and I've completely lost my train of thought. So, here we are. Yeah, so wages increased dramatically. Landowners had to start paying people to work for them. So yeah, the 1300s wasn't the first time the bubonic plague showed up. It did show up first in the 11th century, I believe, and then it showed up again later in the 14th century, in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, depending what parts of Eurasia you were in. So it definitely didn't just die out. It definitely slowed down during the 1350s, but it did still stick around for a few more years. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my other ones. I've done Baba Yaga, I've done the Yule Lads, I've done the origin of Halloween, I've done a bunch of fun ones like that, so definitely go check those out. If you want more pixie hair tutorials or pixie hair videos, check out my Instagram, That Spooky Lifestyle. It will be linked below to get these, you know, hair inspiration. I do daily quick 1-minute videos over there. And yeah, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already so you don't lose me in the social media void, and I will see you guys in my next video.